Your local radio station.
Senedd Talk Radio.
It's Friday, May the 7th. Welcome along to our coverage of the Senedd elections 2021. Joining me in the studio today is Gwynoro Jones, former MP for Carmarthenshire and our political analyst. We'll be bringing you all the results as they come in, along with interviews with the candidates involved in the election process.
Your stories, your platform. This is Senedd Talk Radio.
Welcome along. My name's Alan Evans. This is Senedd Talk Radio.
Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world. A decent world that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Well, that wasn't Gwynoro Jones, you'd be glad to know, but he joins us now in the studio. Gwynoro, a very passionate speech there by Charlie Chaplin from The Great Dictator. Would he get your vote?
Well, probably he would, to be honest. I heard reminiscences of me as a young politician. We were all tended to be idealistic when we started, and much of what was said there is true, and it is something that should be aspired to. You know, for instance, I give you an example. The United Nations, after the Second World War, was supposed to meet and to bring together the nations of the world and try and solve the issues at the United Nations of 127 countries. But what happened? Very soon afterwards, the power politics came in. Russia, China, East, West, the Iron Curtain, and everything else. So, yeah, it was a good speech. He deserved a standing ovation.
Yeah. So here we are on the verge of electing another Welsh government. 20 years of Welsh Labour, Gwynoro. You've seen it all. Are you happy with the way it's panned out politically in Wales? The Senedd institution, this bastion of democracy within the heart of Wales, the capital, Cardiff.
I'm not happy with the way the Senedd operates, no doubt about that, and maybe we'll come to that bit later on in the programme. But when we look at Wales politically and how it's panned out over the last 20 years, it's been slow progress. Devolution came, but only gradually has it gained a few more powers, and sometimes reluctantly so. There was a debate as to whether we should change the name. There was a debate and a referendum even as to whether we should have the power to raise limited taxes. Now, the disappointment for me is that we have never been treated, devolution-wise, politically-wise, in the power struggle at UK level like Scotland. Scotland is well ahead of us in how it governs itself, the powers it has, the powers of its parliament. We here in Wales, I don't know, we lack the moral fibre, I think. We lack the backbone to be assertive and to stand up and to speak for Wales and to speak politically for Wales. Parties can have differences of opinion, but there seems to be a reluctance to be over-assertive. There's no such thing as that in Scotland, you notice. Sturgeon and the SNP and even the Labour Party in the years of old, when I was around, in the 70s and the 80s, you had John Smith, Donald Dewar and all those people, very assertive politicians. We lack that in Wales.
So that's your kind of overview of the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament. I mean, looking ahead, let's just say we get the same old people voted in. Is it going to change? Are we going to get that passion? Are we going to get that level? Are they getting the message from the people that, we need them to speak out on these issues?
The problem with it is it's all too comfortable. You know what I mean? It's almost given that there will be a Labour government. Now, that's problem number one. And when there was an attempt back in 2007, was it? When Plaid Cymru and the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats almost worked and got through to form a coalition government. There were a lot of voices inside the Labour Party, inside Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood, Bethan Jenkins, I think, gave an awful time to Ieuan Wyn Jones. There's a reluctance to move ahead, to change. Remember, Wales has been Labour since about 1918. That's over 100 years. In 1931, after the General Depression and the financial crash back then, there was a collapse in Labour right across the UK, but not in Wales. Labour only had 51 MPs, 30 of them were in Wales. And that is the problem, I think. We are so entrenched in Labour politics, and therefore I think the Labour Party itself needs a new vision, needs a new impetus, needs to look further afield than itself. And I've been a member for 20 years, and I know how it works. It is not sufficiently adventurous enough, visionary enough, moving forward enough for the sake of the Principality. That is my biggest failing. And by the end of the day, you do need, by the way, a mixture of Labour and Plaid Cymru in Welsh politics. One without the other is not going to work.
OK. There we are. We'll have some music and we'll come right back with Gwynoro Jones. Sam Cook and only 16. Welcome back to the studio. With me is Gwynoro Jones. And this will be the first time 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, and for that matter, some 18-year-olds are voting in Wales. So, Gwynoro, 16-year-olds can vote, but will they vote? Have they voted? Have they registered? What would that do to Welsh politics, do you think?
Well, it won't have too much of an impact first time round. And for what all the evidence is, that only half of them did actually register to vote. And how many of those have actually bothered to vote in the end will be interesting. In certain seats, they could have made a difference. But it does depend, of course, until we won't find out until later in the day, at what percentage of them did turn out. But the registration is the disappointment. Mind you, I'm not quite sure whether the political parties and the institutions, the schools, the colleges, how much attention did they give and how much notice, publicity, marketing did they make of the fact? I saw a few things over the last few months, but I would have thought that there would have been posters in every school, posters in every college, I don't know if there were, alerting them to the need to register. So the question of how many turned out is going to be one of the issues.
Well, there we are. We know these people will only be elected on the backs of the common people. Could they rely on the postal votes? Was there a possibility of future online voting? This has been a very different set of circumstances, and it could affect the result. Gwynoro, how will politicians have been faring on the doorstep amid what has been a terrible year for most people?
Oh, it's been hugely difficult, and as you said, the uncertainty was considerable. The point being, there probably will be far more postal votes this time than ever before. That was inevitable. Safety, social distancing, keeping people away from the polling booths. So postal voting will be a major involvement in the result, I have no doubt. But canvassing itself has been very difficult. It's been, only about 2 weeks or so that they've been allowed to knock on doors. They was allowed to deliver leaflets, but not to speak with the voters. So that's been very, very difficult. And I get the impression, I'm sure it wasn't so for the candidates' mind and their key workers, to say it's a low-key campaign. It looks as if it's a low-key campaign as far as the voters go. But the actual candidates, I'm sure they gave it a good go. But yes, it's totally different style, far quieter, far more peaceful, far more respectful as well, if I may say. You know what I mean? I can think of the times when I fought Carmarthen 3 times with Gwynoro. It wasn't as peaceful as this, I assure you. And that life was not in the campaign, was it? It was not controversial. It was as if everybody understood the enormity of the scene and the situation and the year we've gone through. And that year, let's face it, has knocked the stuffing out of people. And politics has been low down the agenda. You know, villages, communities, families, the last thing on their mind was politics.
A lot of paperwork came through my door. I'm not sure if a lot of it came through your door as well. Do you think people will be taking the time to read these? I spoke to a voter yesterday in Pontiats, and she said, actually, this was interesting, that she was going to vote for David Llewellyn, but she changed her mind because when she read the leaflet he sent, there were grammatical and spelling errors, and she felt that if he could not get his grammar and spelling right, he certainly could not be the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Yeah, that's an old story, that. Candidates and their agents not checking the fine print of what they send out. And yes, mistakes do happen, either at the printers or the original writer of the leaflet. My experience has been that I don't know how much attention people pay to those leaflets. You know, I fought 5-6 elections, and I thought in each one that my leaflets were by far the most informative and best. Well, I won 3 and lost 3. So, I don't know. It's difficult. It's difficult to say the impact. But it's like any marketing, isn't it, Alan? You know what I mean? If you're marketing the business, if you're anyone marketing a business, they're told it's the first 10 seconds that matters. From the door to the bin, in terms of what happens to that leaflet. Do they read that leaflet or not? You've only got a few seconds to hold people's attention.
There we are. Well, a change is going to come no matter what. Rob Allen and a Working Man, a real anthem there, almost giving me goose pimples. Gwynoro, a working man it is, and a working man and woman will be going to the polls yesterday across Wales, and we're waiting for those results.
Yes, but I need to say something about that song. I found that song a bit emotional. Because remember, I was the son of a colliery carpenter. Both my grandfathers worked in either Blaenhyrwyn or Great Mountain Tumble, and then my father eventually in Cynhydre. What that song says is quite true. My father used to tell me many, many, many times when I was in my teenage to make sure that I did well in school at Gwendraith, etc., because I don't want you to go underground. I don't want you to witness what I have witnessed. And it's not natural, he used to say. He used to say that often to me. It's not natural for a man to be underground. And twice I've been underground. Once there was a colliery disaster in Cynhydre when 6 people were killed. And I went down... I was Member of Parliament then, and I went down to the very spot where the accident happened, where the explosion happened. And this was a few days afterwards, and I touched the coal, and it was still hot. It was still hot after the explosion. Sentimental times. I know coal mining was the backbone of Wales, the backbone of employment, but it was an unnatural thing for the Welsh people to have done. Anyway, so the working man and voting, yes. The working man has moved on, mind. The working man and woman, communities, more often than not voted Labour. But in the last 30, 40 years, a good 30% of what we call the working class now vote Conservative. They voted for Mrs Thatcher. They voted for Boris. They've voted in Hartlepool for the Tories to win the by-election. The Brexit referendum, and the working man as a folklore thing in our mind has changed. The working man is no longer a traditional Labour voter, and that is what's made politics different.
Let's look then at, you say that the Welsh Assembly was formed 20 years ago, the Welsh Parliament as it is now. In all that time, there's only been a Welsh Labour government. What has the opposition been like? What has the institution been like to observe? Gwynoro, you've got your unique views on this. Tell us how you see the last 2 decades of Welsh government and the opposition.
Well, maybe I'm of the old school, where politicians were radical orators, campaigners in a big way. I miss that in the politics of Wales over the last 20 years. It isn't there. Too sedate, too benign, too gentlemanly. All that campaigning of days of old has gone. That's the first thing. The second thing, the voting system itself, of course, makes it very difficult for the opposition parties to break through. Certainly the third, fourth and fifth parties. The Assembly is made for two-party politics, and that needs changing. That is why we need voting reform. That is why voting reform will exhilarate and change and enthuse the Assembly. It's not enthusiastic, is it? I have to be honest with you. I hardly ever watch it. Every time I do, I've been there about twice, and I left after about 20 minutes. Because it is so quiet, they're so orderly, so structured, and the speaker, Llefarydd, so coordinates things. There's no freedom there. It's difficult to get your point over because there's a structure. It's a structured debate, a structured assembly, and that does inhibit debating. Open discussion. And if you say something that might be regarded a bit risque or over the top, as they do in the House of Commons, no problems. You know what I mean? Ian Blackford asked Boris last week, do you think you're a liar, Prime Minister? That would never be allowed in the Senedd. It needs to relax a bit. It needs to be active. I don't know how many people watch it on telly or listen or whatever. I certainly don't. I find it boring. And they need to change that. And that also reflects itself in the number of people who turned out. It is difficult to believe why less than half the Welsh people have not voted since it began. Now, why is that? Do they find it useful? Do they find it makes an impact? Does it draw their attention? And that is why I've said this many times, and I stick with this. There's too much of a club atmosphere in the Senedd. It is too Cardiff-centric, too much of a club atmosphere, and it does not govern for West, Mid and North Wales. That's been my view from the beginning.
OK, we get the message loud and clear that you find it hard to tolerate it. O hyd a bwys y ti o reigra fel ar y mynydd Gwynoro.
Yeah.
Now, the question of Welsh language is one, independence, Welsh language is one that has raged for many decades. Gwynoro, you've written a book on this very subject. Give us a quick painted canvas of the fight for independence in Wales and what that is likely to be, the implications of that today for voters in Wales as they have gone to the polls.
Gosh, what a subject. It took us 2.5 years to write the book, mind. So you want me to do this in 2 or 3 minutes or 4 minutes?
Not the book, just the kind of how will independence. I just wanted to look at today now and just look at the vote and think, how will people going to the polls be voting? Will they have independence for Wales at the heart of their decision to put an X in the box for Plaid Cymru?
Some will, but not the majority, I have no doubt. And they have already voted. We are here waiting for the result today. They voted yesterday. But the quick synopsis is devolution and the nationhood of Wales, which we cover in this book that's out soon, this week or next week at the latest. It's been a problem. It's been divisive. It's been always an issue. The powers that the Welsh people should have, the power devolution should give to Wales, the strength of the nationhood of Wales. Should Wales be independent? Can it afford to be independent? Is it big enough a country? Now, those last few questions are being addressed more now than ever. The first question is, are we big enough to be on our own? Certainly, yes. You can vote for, be part of the United Kingdom or remain like that as a union. Fine, no problem. But let's not kid ourselves that Wales is too small. There are 7 countries in the European community that are smaller than Wales. We are the 30th in terms of world rankings, in terms of economic development and production. 30th, not 100th. Of course Wales can be on its own. Question is, do the people want it? Is there a desire for it? Do they understand that? We raise more taxes in Wales than what devolution costs. That's the first thing. We give about 11, 12, more than that, billion back to Westminster, to the Treasury every year. Of course, that's to cover defence, welfare and many other things. So it's not an issue of can we afford it. It's all to do with what is the best way of governing Wales, what structure Wales should have, and what is its role within the United Kingdom. And I fear for many years, for a century probably, and more actually, this image of the empire, British Empire, and we are part of this United Kingdom, is waning, is fracturing, it's struggling to survive. That's inevitably. Look what's happening in Scotland, what indeed is happening in Northern Ireland now after Brexit. I would say I probably won't be around unless the good Lord gives me another 15, 20 years. The future of the UK Union is fragile. It's creaking. The question is going to be, what is the future for Wales within that? Can you imagine? This question always hangs behind my mind. If Scotland goes independent, as it probably will over 10 years, maybe not now, within 10 years, because the young people themselves, if 70% of the under 35s in Scotland want independence. Okay, and 60% over the over 70s don't want. But who's going to win? Who's dying quicker? It's inevitable. Northern Ireland will form some union with Southern Ireland. I have no doubt about it. Again, within 10. Right then. Question for the Welsh people. Do they still want to be linked with England? Is it still going to be England and Wales? That's the question.
There, Gwynoro, we tried to get Helen Mary. She wasn't available there.
She's probably on pills and needles, my friend.
Very busy, right. Yeah. Let's go to that. And London Calling, The Clash was the last piece of music. We hear more about politics in Westminster more often than not than we do about politics in Wales. London is still the centre of the world for decision-making for some. There may be those who believe that a Welsh Conservative government would get a better deal for Wales with the Conservative government set to be in Westminster, possibly for another term. Do you think that would be the case? Do you think we'd get a better deal if the Welsh Conservatives were in Wales?
Well, it's always been the case. Since back in the 60s and the 70s, there was the argument, if you have a Labour administration in Wales or in local government or whatever, and a Labour government in Westminster, that is bound to be beneficial. There is an argument to be made for it, that should there be a Senedd, which is a Welsh Conservative Senedd, well, of course, the Westminster Tory leadership, Prime Minister and all that, Johnson, would look more kindly towards what the Tory party in Wales is saying. That is natural politics. Whether that will happen, I doubt whether the Tories will win. But that is natural to the game. But you made a point that Westminster dominates. It only dominates because the media is so weak in Wales that we do not have sufficient propaganda, information, news about what goes on in Wales. We'll come to it later on. Remember, 70% of what the people of Wales read comes from Daily Mail, Daily Express, Telegraph, Times, Guardian, Western Mail, Evening Post, South Wales Argus, North Wales Daily Post are minimal in that situation. That is why Westminster dominates. It's the media in Wales is too weak to compete with that vast weapon, which is the Westminster steamroller of media presentation. BBC, okay, we have BBC Wales, but really, how much of a Welsh context is there to BBC Wales News, for instance? You know, it often will start with a Westminster headline. But no, to go back to your question, yes, if the administration in the two were as one, that obviously would be a much better cohesively and wise than otherwise. Would I welcome that? Most certainly not. I don't want to have Boris Johnson have more influence over Wales than he's got already.
You know that the media in Wales has been struggling, newspapers shutting down, offices closing, things moving further and further east towards Cardiff and London. North Wales, non-existent, Mid Wales, you know. We're involved in this. You've seen the struggle for Senedd Online and Wales News Online and other hyperlocals across Wales as well. Do you foresee the Welsh Government stepping in here at arm's length to offer some help in order that, you know, people can attend the Senedd and report on that, people can go to council meetings, people can hold these people to account? Do you think that we're going to get some help?
Well, of course, just before the election, one of the Senedd committees has recommended that a fund be put up to help businesses like yours, hyperlocals, and other sort of media in Wales. Whether it will happen, I'm not sure, but it needs to happen. The Welsh media needs strengthening. And what I take by the Welsh media, by the way, I don't mean the Western Mail, and I don't mean BBC Wales. I mean at local level, at a level which is independent, needs strengthening. Now, you have set up a system, hyperlocal, and you have set up a system where the 5 regions of Wales get their news coverage on Wales News Online. Now, that is a very good way ahead for the Welsh media in Wales in general. But it needs support. It needs nurturing. It needs seed corn money to develop and grow. I think we'll approach that later when we talk with the manifestos. Every political party in their manifestos said such a thing should happen.
Your local radio station.
We are Senedd Talk Radio.